Royal Highnesses, President Lennart, have I seen him? Anyway, distinguished judges of the court, thank you for your hospitality extended to all of us today. Ministers, governors, excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to invite you to this Bridge Forum dialogue session in hybrid format on Europe's economic and monetary union, its past, present and future. To be quite frank, I'm not a fan of these digital formats. Thank God that's over. But today I'm very happy that we have it because the requests for seats were so big that we would not be able to accommodate everybody. So I'm glad that quite a few people are connected electronically. And therefore I offer a special welcome also to those following us online. I'm Werner Hoyer, I'm the President of the European Investment Bank, based here in Luxembourg. And the EIB, long ago, helped establish the forum together with the Luxembourg Central Bank and others after the launch of the euro in 1999 to provide something like an intellectual bridge between the EU institutions here and the wider civil society. And EMU in all its aspects has been a recurrent topic for its many conferences. After all that time, we could ask ourselves, what more is there to say? From 11 countries at the start, 19 now share our common currency, and on January 1st next year, the 20th, Croatia will join. It's working, isn't it? Well, to answer that question, we have gathered today as distinguished a panel as anyone could imagine. Back in 1990, at the start of the first stage of EMU, I was a whip of my parliamentary group in Parliament in Bonn at that time, more concerned about my country's coming unification, which we celebrated just yesterday, and the implications that might have for European security. Here today, we have many who were already then making EMU's history and others now determining its future. Therefore, as the European Investment Bank does not print euros, but lend them, I will limit my contribution to introductions. Let me start with Luxembourg, whose politicians and technocrats have been instrumental to the euro's birth, perhaps because of the experience, good and bad, of being in Europe's only active currency union before 1999. 2 years ago, the Bridge Forum marked the 50th anniversary of the eponymous report by former Prime Minister Pierre Werner that mapped out the path towards a single currency. And today, we have with us quite a number of his hearers. Jean-Claude Juncker, of course, who negotiated and signed the Maastricht Treaty as finance minister, became prime minister, served as Eurogroup chairman through the depth of the Eurozone debt crisis, and then went on to become president of the European Commission. And in the audience, I see former Central Bank Governor Yves Mersch. Where is he? Yes. Well, he's announced, he will come. Who was involved in the Maastricht negotiations too before becoming Luxembourg's first central bank governor and moving to the ECB. Together with us also Jean-Claude's successors at the helm of the Eurogroup, Finance Minister Jeroen Dijsselbloem. He cannot be here with us today because he has just been elected mayor of Eindhoven and needs to chair his first council meeting, so he better doesn't miss that. But he will be connected with us. And former Portuguese Finance Minister Mario Centeno, now central bank governor and member of the ECB's governing council. EMU, of course, has had many milestones, and today we are here also to mark 2 more. 10 years since the European Stability Mechanism was inaugurated on the 8th of October 2012. And even more momentously, the departure of Klaus Regling, its first managing director. Still a few days to go. Klaus was also the head of the ESM precursor, the so-called temporary European Financial Stability Facility established in 2010 in the midst of the Eurozone debt crisis. Before that, he served in senior roles in the European Commission and German Finance Ministry, where I first met him more than a quarter of a century ago, when we tried to coordinate European affairs in the Foreign Ministry and with the Finance Ministry at that time every week. Now, after 40 years of public service, he is taking a well-earned step back from the front line. Let's see whether that really materializes with the step back, but we'll see. When the ESM was established, many thought, not for the first time, that the days of the single currency were numbered. Klaus, you helped prove the skeptics wrong. I'm also very honored to have with us today the EMU's future, and in particular Luxembourg's finance minister, now, Juri Backes. We especially look forward to hearing your thoughts at this time when talk of a new fiscal framework for Europe and possibly even discussions on a new treaty are in the air. Last but not least, let me thank Maria de Mercis for taking up the demanding task to moderate this most interesting panel. And I apologize to all those who I do not mention by name today. It's simply too many, and I apologize for this omission. It would cost you half an hour now, and that would not be responsible. But I need to tell you that in 2015, Jean-Claude Juncker was among the 5 presidents of the European institutions who put their names to a report completing Europe's economic and monetary union, suggesting the job could be done by 2025. So we still have some time, but not unlimited. Let's be ambitious. The report's introduction concluded by saying a complete EMU is not an end in itself. It is a means to create a better and fairer life for all citizens, to prepare the Union for future global challenges, and to enable each of its members to prosper. With that thought, let me finish and pass the floor to our first speaker. Dear Yuriko, the floor is yours.
Altesse Royale, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as you have just done, I will not name all the dignitaries here today either. I think it would take too much time, but it is fantastic to see so many of you here today and to also see young people in the audience. So welcome, and let me start by saying big thank you to the Bridge Forum and also the ESM for organizing this very prestigious symposium. And of course, we want to welcome those who are joining us via web stream also. It's really a big honor for me to introduce the keynote speaker as well, Klaus Regling, Managing Director and Founding Father of the ESM and of the EFSF, and to welcome the panelists here today who are really first-hand witnesses and shapers of the historic decisions that have marked our economic and monetary union. Werner Hoyer has mentioned it. 50 years ago, a group led by former Luxembourgish Prime Minister Pierre Werner embarked on the very ambitious task to outline the principles and the stages of a fully fledged economic and monetary union. It was to be, in Pierre Werner's own words, and I quote him, the crowning glory of European integration, or the all-powerful engine driving integration. So today we have really come a very long way with the introduction of our single currency, and I think we can really say this has been an absolute success. The euro has made the lives of our citizens much easier, also more prosperous. The euro has significantly strengthened Europe, also at the international stage. And it is now the second most important currency on our planet after the US dollar, used by more than 340 million people, soon to be by 20 countries for everyday payments. And I think maybe this is something some of us might take for granted, but we really shouldn't. We should be very proud of this achievement. Today's exchange comes at a very difficult time, I think, coming out of the pandemic. We have another crisis to tackle. We have to address the fallout from the unjustified and terrible war that Russia is waging on the Ukraine. But over the years, we have proven time and time again, I think, and I hope that you will agree with me, that it's really Europe's unique ability to compromise, Europe's unique ability to find solutions to the complex problems such as the ones we are faced with today. The years after the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, have been a particularly eventful decade that has required really tremendous and very strong leadership. At the time, I was accompanying former Prime Minister of Luxembourg and former President of the Eurogroup to the European Council and to the Eurogroup meetings as a Sherpa. I remember all these all-night sessions and the 5, 6 o'clock in the morning press conferences. I don't know how it's possible to do this still physically, but you managed, and I really want to salute Jean-Claude Juncker here today, for whom I worked many years and for whom I have very, very high esteem and from whom I have learned a lot. So it was exactly 10 years ago. The integrity of the Eurozone was at stake, and the EFSF, later replaced by the ESM, was put in place to lend over 300 billion euros to Greece, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, and Cyprus. The banking union, with its two existing pillars, namely the single supervisory mechanism and the single resolution mechanism, is really also key milestone of the EMU, providing for financial stability and helping to build crisis resilience. So it's really a great privilege, ladies and gentlemen, that we have the architects of these really momentous developments here with us today, and we will hear from them whether from today's perspective they would have done things the same or perhaps differently. Dear Klaus, I also want to take this opportunity to deliver some personal words of farewell to you. I think today you can look back on an extraordinary career. As a German finance ministry official, you helped negotiating the Maastricht Treaty. As Director General of the Commission, you also oversaw the euro area economies, before you were then tasked of setting up the rescue mechanisms. Yesterday we celebrated the 10th anniversary of the ESM, and you have been there from the start, from day one. And under your leadership, you have anchored this institution as a very important part of the European network, part of the European institutions of today. And Pascal last evening paid a very beautiful tribute to you, highlighting among many of your qualities, especially four qualities, that is really your courtesy, your authority, your expertise, and the fact that you are a fantastic European, and with your own personal touch, the contribution you have made to a stronger Europe is what you will be remembered for. So thank you so much, Klaus. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, over the years, we have reached new stages in the development of the EMU that go beyond its initial prospects. The reforms that the EU has undertaken in response to the successive crises, and of course also the ongoing efforts to overcome the current energy crisis, will, at least I hope so, strengthen the EMU. But we should not forget that the stability of our monetary union is very intrinsically linked to an effective coordination of our economic and fiscal policies. And as we know, and we have been spending yesterday in the Eurogroup and this morning in the ECOFIN, this is and remains a challenge. Our very determined, necessary and substantial reaction to shield European citizens and to shield European businesses has had very significant impacts on the budgets, national budgets of all of our countries. It has shown again that sound public finances are a prerequisite to act forcefully, to act that we need these as also buffers in view of a possible next crisis, because the future is always comes up with unknowns. The future is always full of unknowns for which we need to be equipped. And we have also seen, this is outside of the Eurozone and outside of the EU, with recent events that have shown that also unsustainable policies can very quickly erode trust and confidence, not only of citizens, but also of investors. So the protection of sound public finances, the financial system, and our economic policy coordination, they're all interlinked, and they depend on one another, and as such, they will remain the key pillars of our Euro project, of our economic and of our social prosperity. In the new global context of perma-crisis, and I think we are really seeing we're falling from one crisis into the next, we need a strong and united European Union today more than ever. Next Generation EU program also marked a historic agreement, putting the EU as a whole on a path towards a greener and a more digital economy. And I think this dual transition is absolutely indispensable for our future. With the war in the Ukraine, it has become clear that the green transition has also become a matter of energy security. So moving away from fossil fuels, reducing our energy consumption, to which everyone can contribute to, increasing our energy efficiency, and accelerating the transition towards renewable energy resources must be dealt with as a matter of urgency. Let me make 4 very brief further points that, in my eyes, are very important in the current context. The first one is that the EU has suffered over the years from an investment gap ever since, really, from the times of the financial crisis. So compared to the US and Asia, European companies have actually grown slower and have invested less in innovation. We must correct this. It's not too late to correct this. It's really very important, because we have learned this lesson from the last crisis. Coming out of the pandemic, we were investing in the green and digital transition, and this was the right thing to do to make our economies more resilient and to make our economies more competitive. The second point I'd like to make is that this also means fostering a strong pan-European financial sector to support exactly those companies that need financing in their growth and investing in innovation. And the Capital Markets Union, in particular, can play a very important role in encouraging a broad range of financing resources for Europe's companies and for investors. This leads me to a third point, in that a strong and a successful Capital Markets Union has to be based on the principle of smart regulation. Let's move away from over-regulation. Let's do smart regulation. And finally, in order to succeed in these efforts, the EU will need to promote cross-border financial services within the financial market, but at the same time, we need to remain open to the rest of the world. We cannot afford creating a fortress Europe. Neither Brexit, nor the pandemic, nor current discussions around strategic autonomy should be used as excuses to add barriers to our internal market. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in these times of really extreme uncertainty, it's really that the European cooperation that brings stability. It brings stability to our citizens, it must bring stability to our investors and to our businesses. So again, 50 years ago, the group led by Pierre Werner embarked on this ambitious task to openly discuss and agree upon a common vision for an economic and monetary union. And today we have here the opportunity to take stock of what has been learned over these past many years and to discuss how we can have a more balanced, a more solid and hopefully also a fairer European Union going forward. I think that's what citizens expect from us, and we must not let them down. I thank you for your attention.
Your Highness, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to see all of you here, and I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion, but I will take a few minutes to also talk about the past, the present, and the future. Looking back, I vividly remember that phone call I received on a Monday evening in June 2010. I was in Brussels, where I had just set up my consultancy after spending a year at the university in Singapore. Carsten Pillert from the Council Secretariat at the time told me that the Eurogroup was looking for a CEO for the newly created EFSF. And Jean-Claude Juncker thought I would be a good candidate to set up such a fund. In case of interest, I should come to Luxembourg and be interviewed the next morning. So I drove to Luxembourg the next morning, where an ECOFIN Council meeting was taking place. I was interviewed by 3 euro area finance ministers and by Thomas Wieser, chairman of the EWG, who reported back to the full Eurogroup, it went well, I had never gotten a job so quickly. And I hope I didn't disappoint you, Jean-Claude. Many thought that the mere creation of such a fund would reassure markets that it might never be used and be temporary. In fact, I was afraid, as I was driving from Brussels to Luxembourg, that I would not have much to do after setting up the new institution. Well, we know the following years were quite different. 12 years later, I'm speaking to you today, 3 days before the end of my mandate. The first weeks and months at the EFSF were very hectic. My first important task was to convince investors that our bonds were worth buying and that the euro was here to stay, because without investors, the whole scheme would not have worked. The pressure was on. It was a crucial moment, as investors in some parts of the world, especially in the Anglo-Saxon world, were convinced that the euro would disappear the next 5 years. Fortunately, I could convince other investors, most importantly in Asia, that we would manage the crisis successfully. Hence, we were able to secure our funding. 7 months after its creation, the EFSF, staffed at that point in time by only 8 people, had to issue its first bond, 5 billion euro, to finance the Irish program. After the EFSF had helped 3 euro area countries, it became clear that a permanent firewall was needed. There was a loophole, a gap in the architecture of the monetary union, as no lender of last resort for sovereigns had been foreseen. The ESM was therefore created in October 2012. In total, EFSF and ESM lent close to 300 billion euro to 5 program countries. Our adjustment programs were successful, all of them. All countries significantly reduced their macroeconomic imbalances, regained market access after the end of their programs, and then had a better economic performance than the euro area average. Jean Monnet was right when he said that Europe would be forged in crisis. With every crisis, EMU has become stronger. The euro crisis triggered the creation of significant institutional innovations. Next to the EFSF and ESM, regulatory agencies for banks, markets, and insurance companies, the single supervisory mechanism, the single resolution mechanism, and a macroprudential authority were created. We are now facing the fourth crisis in 15 years. After the global financial crisis, the euro crisis, the pandemic, we have rediscovered the horrors of a war at our doorsteps. This conflict risks pushing the euro area into recession while also adding to inflationary pressures. This stagflationary environment makes policymaking and economic policy coordination more difficult. Rising interest rates have also triggered fears that another euro crisis is imminent. There are three reasons why I believe such fears are greatly exaggerated. First, no country in the euro area today shows macroeconomic imbalances comparable to what we saw during the euro crisis. During the first decade of monetary union, leading up to the euro crisis, several countries experienced a substantive loss in competitiveness, which led to gaping trade deficits that required constant and unsustainably high capital imports and large fiscal deficits. Second, interest rates are rising now, but the interest burden of budgets of euro area member states is at the lowest level in half a century in all euro area countries, despite much higher debt levels. It is still much cheaper for a euro area country to refinance its debt today than 10 or 20 years ago. And third, the institutional innovations that I mentioned earlier safeguard financial stability within the euro area. Thanks to these three factors, the euro area today is less vulnerable. But it would be good to hear, of course, from the four presidents whether they share this view. When looking back to the euro crisis, it is also important to remember that the solution to the euro crisis was three-pronged. First and foremost, the program countries themselves implemented ambitious adjustment policies. While this created hardship, these adjustment and reform programs were key in tackling the economic problems that had accumulated over time. Second, the European Central Bank introduced non-conventional monetary policy measures which helped restore the monetary policy transmission mechanism. The announcement of OMT in September 2012, which combines an ESM adjustment program with potentially unlimited market intervention by the ECB, had an important impact in this respect. And third, conditional lending by the EFSF and ESM at a time when no other financing was available for the countries in financial distress. The euro crisis was overcome because these three actions unfolded simultaneously. Although EMU has become more resilient over the years, additional reforms are needed to fill the remaining gaps. Finalizing banking union and completing the capital markets union would complement our single market with a single market for financial services. This would lead to a better allocation of capital across the EU, strengthen potential growth, and increase risk sharing via markets. This would reduce fragmentation and promote convergence within the euro area. Currently, we have actually 19 different capital markets in the euro area, which is unattractive for international investors and a barrier to a stronger role of the euro in the international monetary system. In addition, to complete the EMU architecture, we need a central fiscal capacity for the euro area. In a monetary union, countries give up two important policy levers, the exchange rate and monetary policy. When faced with shocks, the only macroeconomic lever left is fiscal policy. And therefore, it would be useful to complement national fiscal buffers with a European fiscal buffer. Hence, there is a strong case for introducing a central fiscal capacity to make the euro area more resilient by providing macroeconomic stabilization and increasing public risk sharing. It could be designed as a revolving fund without additional transfers from member states. The ESM could add such an instrument to its toolbox, drawing on its existing infrastructure and financial resources. Let me conclude. Based on the many years I have been involved in European policymaking, I draw two main conclusions. First, and this is the bad news, crises always occur. We don't know where and when, but they do occur. The euro area has not escaped that fate. It has experienced different crises of different nature, requiring different responses. Second, and this is the good news, we have always found ways to get out of these crises, becoming stronger in the process. What we should bear in mind for future crises, though, is that finding the right medicine for each case is key, especially when the symptoms are similar, but the root causes are different. I'm looking forward to the views and insights of our panelists. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rechling, for your words. And ladies and gentlemen, always a very warm welcome also on my behalf. My name is Maria de Mergis. I am the Deputy Director of Bruegel, which is a Brussels-based economics think tank, and I'm delighted to be here in the company of the presidents. As we heard, we are here to discuss the Economic and Monetary Union, how we got here and what happens next. And what better people to discuss this than those who, as the Minister said, they have first-hand experience. They are the architects of the policies that we have seen and we're also making. I'd like to start the discussion chronologically, if I may, with you, Mr. Juncker. You were amongst those who devised the first set of policies to deal with the euro area crisis. We had a number of countries that became program countries, and all of them have applied reforms and have come out of this crisis better. In all senses of the word, I think this is a great achievement. But at the time when this happened, there was also a lot of criticism from the levels of the, or certainly from the citizens, about the costs of those reforms and the speed at which they had happened. Do you acknowledge this, or with hindsight, is this something that you would like to have done differently?
Royal Highness, Honourable Prime Minister, it's easier for me to accept that mistakes were made now than 2 or 3 years before. But we were living already then in a time of uncertainties. I had to go through different periods of uncertainties. The first was during the period where we tried to create the single currency. Nobody remembers the difficulties we were facing when trying, back in 91, I was chairing the Intergovernmental Conference, having led to the creation of the single currency, by those of our opponents who didn't believe in the single currency. Not only German professors, also German and other policy makers. I have them all in my mind. The second period of uncertainty, of danger, was the so-called euro crisis, which in fact was not a real euro crisis, but a public debt crisis in the euro area. And during that period, I was working in close cooperation with Klaus Regling, and I wanted to pay tribute to you, Klaus, for the job you have done, and for all the efforts and the energy you have invested in, yes, the credibility of the single currency. I will always remember the eve of your, as it seems, too rapid appointment. I was sharing the Eurogroup in Luxembourg, and I gave you a call saying that I would think that you would be the right man at the right moment, at the right place, and finally you accepted. I was calling, by the way, during the Eurogroup meeting. I was sharing the Eurogroup meeting, and on my handy I was discussing with Klaus. I thought he would be in Singapore, but he had landed in Brussels, launching a consultancy, because he, at that period, at that moment of time, he finally wanted to earn some money. I interrupted that process by promoting his appointment as chair of the EMS. Did we make, that was your question, did we make mistakes? Yes, not only mistakes. We organized under difficult circumstances this European solidarity, which is a difficult objective to achieve when you have an independent central bank and a Eurogroup and an ECOFIN to some extent composed by national politicians not really used to the necessities of the coordination of economic policies. When we were negotiating the Maastricht Treaty, I was a fan of putting into place an economic government of the euro area, together with Delors, Bérégovoy, who was the then French finance minister, Philippe Maystadt, the then Belgian finance minister, and myself. We were blocked by the Nordic orthodoxy because they didn't want the politicians to take over their responsibilities, because they mistrusted politicians, although most of them were politicians too. So they knew why they were thinking so, but they took themselves as a bad example. And the adjustment programs we put into place were wise, goal-oriented, but done in a way which was not the best way possible. Because in some countries we did not really respect the national dignities of those concerned by the programs we put into place, which led to a series of misunderstandings in the countries concerned, mainly in Greece, a country which was badly treated by the European policy makers during the so-called euro crisis. Our programs did not take into account the national realities, did not take into account the fact that in the societies concerned, mainly in Greece, there was a huge part of the Greek society which was really poor. And these ordinary but noble people didn't understand what we were doing there in Brussels, because we did not take into account their individual problems. That was the major mistake we made. In the case of Ireland and Spain, things were quite different, because nobody expected, in fact, Spain and Ireland to be drawn into this poisoned waters of the debt crisis, because their domestic performances were quite impressive, but nevertheless, we managed to define the right answers for these countries. So the mistake was that we were too lazy to explain. It has not changed a lot since then, but nevertheless, I was amongst those who were too lazy to explain what they were doing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Juncker. If I may turn now to Mr. Dijsselbloem. Is Mr. Dijsselbloem online?
I am.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Dijsselbloem, if I may turn to ask you the same question as I asked Mr. Juncker, in fact, pick up on Greece effectively, because you were in the eye of the storm when you were president of the Eurogroup, the eye of the Greek storm, if I may call it this way. The crisis for Greece was very long and very protracted, and there was a lot of discontent at the time. We heard a little bit from Mr. Juncker about this. The question to you, as it was with Mr. Juncker, could you have done things differently to reduce at least the duration of the crisis? The reforms that were implemented in Greece were absolutely necessary, but could we have done at a faster pace in order to avoid the duration of such a crisis?
I think a lot of things. Good afternoon, by the way. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And Klaus, I can't see you at the moment, but I know you must be there. To work with you, and you provided me with wisdom over these difficult years of the Euro crisis. And Maria, to answer your question, I think we could have done a lot of things better and different, starting by the way we went into this crisis. And this is not just true for Greece, but for all of our countries. The Eurozone didn't stick to its own fiscal policies that they had agreed between the member states, and we lost competitiveness in a dramatic way in the years leading into the crisis. And in the example of Greece, I think the sovereign debt was already over 100% GDP before the crisis even started. So it's an extreme difficult way to enter such a period. Whereas idyllic, you would have had sound policies in advance, you would have upheld your competitiveness, and you would have built fiscal buffers to get you through difficult times. None of that was there, not at national level and not at Eurozone level. There were no strong institutions. The ECB had only just started, and there were no buffers available. Having said that, I think the three programs for Greece, which were very different, have made mistakes. I think the first one put an enormous emphasis and pressure on fiscal adjustment, on austerity. And looking back, and this is before my time, so I must be careful what I'm saying, I think that the expectations of the fiscal goals that had to be delivered were not realistic at all and put an enormous strain on Greece in the first program. The second program, as you know, was adjusted halfway to give the Greek government more time. And I think more emphasis was put on reforms, quite rightly. And in the third program, even more emphasis was put on sorting out the financial sector and asking for reforms. On the reform side, I think we weren't realistic about what the Greek government and administration could actually deliver. We wanted the reforms on all different topics, on all structural issues that were on the table, and it was just too much at the same time in a very short period. So when your question is, shouldn't it have been done faster? I think we already asked an enormous package of reforms in a very short period of time, which was unrealistic for the Greek government to deliver upon. On the other hand, the political situation was extremely difficult in the Eurozone. It was not just Germany or the Netherlands that was very cool at the time, as you know, about the Greek programs, but also the Baltic states were very critical. They had to also participate in lending and setting up the ESM, while their GDP per capita was much lower than it was in Greece. So also in the Baltic countries and in the Central European countries like Austria, Slovenia, Slovakia, there was a huge debate about the support for Greece. So you have to understand also this political context at the time. To forge a deal to keep Greece inside these programs were, I think, crucial. And yes, it could have been done better.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dijsselbloem. If I may turn to you, Mr. Centeno, now, and I'm slightly changing gears. So you were you're the president of the Eurogroup when the Recovery and the Resilience Facility was created, which is something quite different and unique, and the first time we saw a tool of that sort created in the space of such short time, 3 months I believe it took, at the onset of the pandemic crisis. Was it really a very different crisis, the pandemic crisis, compared to the 2 previous ones we have had? Was this the right tool for the right time, and is this the type of tool that we're going to see in the future?
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the invitation and this wonderful event. Well, the answer is yes. The sovereign crisis was, in fact, endogenous to the euro. In a sense, it was the story of large macroeconomic imbalances that were built over years and then exposed when the financial flows to the periphery abruptly stopped and actually reversed. In contrast, the pandemic was exogenous. It was a huge external shock. There was no moral hazard attached to the pandemic. So it was not just the nature of the shock that was different. We were also in a different position. So that's also something that we need to bear in mind. Indeed, over the years, we had built, and I was lucky to be a witness to that, a modicum of trust. And this is, or was maybe, the intangible result of the long nights disagreeing over reforms of the euro. And also, together with this, there was, in the years prior to the pandemic, quite substantial reduction in risk in the euro area. It was true by then to the banking sector, but it was also to the public finances. At the end of 2019, 14 out of the 19 member states of the Eurozone were at their medium-term objectives. And this was the first time that such a convergence in terms of the reduction of risk existed. And it was surely the result of the set of institutions that we set up before. And this trust that was prevailing at the end of 2019 led us also to the approval by the European Council in December 2019. You were not there anymore. It was a pity because of all the effort you put on to that, of the budgetary instrument for competitiveness and convergence, which was the embryo of a sort of fiscal capacity for the euro area. So when April 2020 arrived with all the information we had and the big shock of the pandemics, when the Eurogroup really cleared the way for the recovery fund, it was over 2 very, very long nights. That were actually interrupted because the web system of the European Commission must be restarted every 8 hours. So I really remember the first time it was probably 3 or 4 a.m. And we had to stop running the system, and I was really panicking and asking my colleagues not to go away because the system will come back. That was how these decisions were taken by then, but they were there. And my fellow finance ministers were there, not just putting their national points across, but indeed they were going back to their prime ministers, to their parliaments, trying to convince them to move and let all of them, all of us, to agree with a truly European solution. I think the solution that was found in the spring of 2020 will forever hold in my opinion, the fondest memories of those meetings. So, looking forward, I am convinced that the Recovery Fund will have a lasting impact and will have a knock-on effect in the euro area fiscal framework. The idea of linking European Union transfers and reforms and doing it for every country is, in my opinion, here to stay. So, should be our, in my, I should say, that is my opinion, of course, of European Union debt. If not for other reason, because now we have to repay it. And it will be a major concern for finance ministers around the table. I hope we can live to this experience and to honor it, because I really think it was a great moment in the middle of a big shock. To finalize, let me just say only a couple of words on sometimes how do I feel the European spirit. We are very bad at dealing with our own imperfections. We always bash too much the European way of doing things. Today, as I see the decisions of the Eurogroup, of each of the 27 countries in Europe, we are the source of stability in policy, economic policy terms in the world. We see many mistakes being made around us. We are affected by them. We have, of course, eventually to respond to them, but we Europeans are the ones that got it right this time, and we should be very happy with that. And this is because of the stronger institutions that we now have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Centeno. I'm hoping to come back to a number of the issues that you picked up, but not before I also give the opportunity to Mr. Donohoe to reflect on the issue of the past. You became part of the government long after the Irish programme had ended, so I would like to give you the opportunity to tell us how you share the experiences of the Irish programme, or indeed of any other programmes that we had to implement. What are the lessons you've learned from the Euro crisis?
Okay, good afternoon, Maria, and good afternoon, Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen. It's a great personal privilege to be here this afternoon and to share a platform with colleagues and leaders that have made such a difference and such a positive impact on the European project. So if I just go to the questions that Maria has put to me, I mean, what's my great lesson from being in a country that went through an economic crisis? I wasn't a member of the government that was involved in creating the programme and negotiating the programme that got Ireland out of our great difficulty, but I was a member of Parliament when we entered the crisis. I was a member of Parliament for all of the crisis, and I've been a member of Parliament since then. And my abiding experience is a very basic point that has completely forged my political and economic outlook, which is that you should do everything you possibly can to avoid getting into that situation in the first place. It's so important, because an experience like that can have such a searing impact on societies, on economies, and on support for how we do politics, both at national level and at a European level. And it's had a profound impact on my outlook on both the national finances of my own country and the euro area and on the institutions of the euro area. All that being said, I want to really endorse the concluding point of Mario, which is while I think it is very important and really necessary to reflect on our mistakes, what we got wrong, what we got better, what we could have done better, I think it's also vital to make the case for the scale of the achievement that we have all delivered now over many generations, and for the incredible achievement that is the euro. And while we will always focus on the economic instrument of the euro and all of the different pillars that create the union of the euro, at the heart of it, it is a political achievement. And it is an extraordinary achievement, given the many different forces and many different pressures that we all face in our national political life and in our European political life. In terms of the lessons for the future and lessons from the programme, ownership at a national level is of incredible importance. To build the kind of relationship that you need with the people on the other side of the table to get out of the terrible difficulty. And I will always remember the referendum that Ireland held in 2012, when we put the key features of our Stability Growth Pact into our constitution in a referendum. And it was one of the toughest political experiences I've ever went through. But the value of it is that we gave a very clear signal to our partners, to those who we were working with, that we were determined to get out of this. Absolutely determined. And that signal, in turn, built up our credibility when we were working together to exit the programme. The design of the programme, to make sure it is appropriate and demanding for the societies and economies within which it is anchored. And then, of course, the exit mechanism, how you get out. That you have the ability to leave in a way in which the chances of a successful exit are as high as possible. If I look at the lessons of the future, I'll maybe make a quasi-political point, if I may, which is I was really struck in Yuriko's excellent introduction that she talked about the era of the perma-crisis. And then Klaus, in his summary of all that he has went through and we have went through, talked about how the European project has used crises to come closer together and forge new instruments. But one of the things I think we need to reflect on as those of us who are very privileged to play our roles in protecting this project is the challenge that when we go through such a crisis, it runs the risk of affecting the political consent for the project in the first place. We're now in an environment in which politics is developing in new and very different and very, very volatile ways. And we should just watch out for how a crisis in a new political environment can actually challenge the political consent for the economic project that we are in. And that is why I feel the Recovery Fund was such a decisive and foundational moment in the life of the euro. Because what happened at that moment is a group of politicians and the institutions at the heart of the euro and the public servants at the heart of the euro came together and said, we will not be taken apart. We are not going to splinter. And I can remember those moments in which it became apparent the scale of the challenge and the political determination to say, we will prevail, we will overcome, we will do what we need to do, which we did. But the, I feel, elegance of the Recovery Fund is it then anchored the response back to COVID in how we go to a different future, in investment in a digital future, in investment in a lower carbon and a very different future for our ecologies, for our young people. And that for me was a really important insight because it said, yes, we're in the crisis of today, but we want to get out of that by thinking differently about our future. And I think that was a really foundational moment in our project that will become very, very, very relevant to how we navigate our way through a world that is changing, in which the frequency of unknown events is clearly building in front of us. That concept of crisis and how we see it as an opportunity for the future, for me, is something that the Recovery Fund, through political will, identified.
Thank you very much, Mr. Donohoe. That's very, very clear. If I may move to where we are now and come back to the panelists, an important difference between where we are now and where we were in any of the previous crises that we've had in the past 12 years is the fact that the previous crises were fundamentally deflationary, where inflation had to do one thing, the central bank, and also the fiscal authorities had to do a very similar thing in tandem. Right now, we are in a position where the two may be pulling in opposite directions, where you have inflation that is actually increasing very fast, and actually a central bank that can't necessarily tackle inflation because it's a very particular sort. And then you have the fiscal authorities that need to sort of stimulate and support and help mitigate the distributional cost of the crisis. If I may come back to you, Mr. Juncker, how do you see the policies that we have to do now in order to deal with, yet again, a very different shock to the ones we've had in the past 12 years?
I do think that we did underestimate, more or less all of us, the dangerosity of inflation. At the very beginning of this pick-up of the inflation, we thought that this would be a temporary event. It was not. And it's becoming increasingly difficult for the ECB to come back to the 2% goal it has fixed as a channel for the inflation. I don't think that this will be possible in the next coming years. And I do think, nevertheless, that we should not overload the monetary policy. ECB can do a lot. It has done a lot in an unorthodox way from time to time, which was not welcomed by each and everyone. But I think that we have to live with that expectation that inflation will stay at a very high level. It will go down, but it will stay at a very high level. For the younger part of our societies, this is an unexperienced event. For my generation, it is not. When I started my political life here in Luxembourg under the leadership of Jacques Santer, together with my friend Robert Goebbels, who was Minister of Economy, we had levels of 12–13%, mainly after this big success of the Belgium-Luxembourgish Monetary Association, when Belgium, in a single-way approach, developed the Luxembourgish currency without asking our opinion. And then we had to put into place anti-inflationary measures. The fiscal policy of member states has to take this into account. And now we are back in a period of higher inflation. And not everything which is initiated in member states is driving the inflation down. I don't think that the German package is really an anti-inflationary package. It has been done without any kind of consultation. Others were very surprised by the magnitude of the German program, and the Commission will have to take all the elements of this program under exam. That will be a very difficult task for the Commission and then for ECOFIN and for others. We should try to avoid a major second round effect. Wages cannot grow at the same speed and at the same magnitude than inflation is, and so we are in a very difficult period. And that's why I do think that the euro area has to perform better, because the economic and monetary union is an incomplete monetary union. We are missing a real fiscal capacity we need, and we should drive all our efforts in that direction.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dijsselbloem, may I come to you? Do you agree with Mr. Juncker that inflation is here to stay for some time? And in which case, what is the right medicine for the current crisis?
I don't know whether the inflation is here to stay at this level. At the moment in the Netherlands, it's at 17% inflation. And it has, as Jean-Claude said, been underestimated. And the impact of it in society, in all of our societies at the moment, is quite destructive. Many institutions in the public sector are facing huge rises in costs, very high energy prices, and are at risk of having to close down. And so the governments in all of our countries need to provide support, but it needs to be very specific, very much directed, because we have to be careful that by huge stimulus programs, we strengthen or we increase inflation even more. So what governments can do must be very specific, well directed at those people that need it and probably need it fast. Also, I'm pretty critical about the ECB. I think the reaction of the ECB is really being too slow and too small. And the risk is that the inflation continues to increase and that the measures that are necessary will become more and more drastic. And I'm becoming very worried about the risk of a prolonged recession in the Eurozone. So the ECB has to do more, has to pick up its speed, and governments need to be very well directed in their support programs. If I may add, I think the debate is more and more focused about fiscal policy. But I would like to point out two things. One is that there is still a lot of work to do in terms of structural reforms. We are not competitive. We are dragging behind in technological development. We are not living up to the economic power that we are. The second one is that we really need to continue with the banking union and the capital markets union. If the capital markets in Europe are better integrated, are deeper and broader, the Eurozone will, in future risks, in future crises, become more shock resilient, be able to absorb shocks. So those are projects that we need to keep working on. And I think we should definitely pick up speed because little progress has been made in the last couple of years.
Thank you very much. Mr. Centeno, may I turn to you? You've heard inflation in the Netherlands, 17%. There are countries in the Eurozone that have got inflation at 20%. We know that monetary policy will have to tighten, but how do we do this and what other policies can we put in place not to stifle growth?
Well, if the previous answer was rather simple to me, this one is very difficult. Unfortunately, this is not one of the 60 days per year in which governors cannot talk about monetary policy because we have our silent days. So I'll answer. I'll give you an answer. I am quite often called as having a dovish perspective over monetary policy, and I will not disappoint you this time again. So, but let me elaborate a little bit on it. My best advice for today actually would be for us to be able to coordinate fiscal and monetary policies assignments to this challenge that is obviously common to all of us. So the medicine for me in that sense is rather simple. Let each policy do what they are designed to do. And of course, the ECB must act on inflation. That's for sure. Let me also remind you that there's nothing really bad that we call as temporary. Everything that is bad is not temporary by definition. So the definition of a temporary phenomenon is a rather difficult thing to do. But it is here, inflation, too high for too long. That's obviously the case. So the ECB started what we call the normalization of monetary policy back in December 2021 with a degree of caution that I think was appropriate given the condition, the financial conditions in the euro area and the challenges that we were facing then. In every meeting, we have been taking decisions on this path to normalization. And we started the hiking process of interest rates. And that is our main weapon today. And we will continue to do that. Of course, we target euro area average inflation, not specific countries' inflation, and that's very important to mention. And I think the coordination issue kicks in precisely at this stage. We need fiscal policy to take care of what fiscal policy can do, which is to be targeted, something that monetary policy can't, and do not generate further pressures on inflation. I take the reference of President Jean-Claude Juncker on second round effects. Of course, central bankers are always fearful of second round effects on wages. Let me add another one that is quite often disregarded, which is the effect on prices coming from the increase in profit margins by firms. This is also something that we are witnessing today that is putting extra pressure on prices. We all understand that firms had a terrible time during the COVID experience. Actually, we all had. But as a matter of fact, it was also true that in all countries, including my own, the first line of response to COVID was public debt, not private debt, which means that at this stage, we would like also to see these other dimensions of our economic sectors to help the efforts of the ECB to fight inflation. Because when we see inflation is a sign that firms are moving prices around, prices tend to be sticky in competitive markets. That's not the case today, and we should ask ourselves why that is the case. And so I add this extra degree of caution vis-à-vis the way our markets operate and how firms move prices around at this stage. If each of these sort of second round effects, being then wages or profit margins by firms, do not comply with this equilibrium path towards more stable prices, the efforts of the ECB will be surely undermined. And so, again, going to the medicine part, central banks are there to manage expectations. So I think it will be a very, very good idea if finance ministers and governors could meet at some point in the near future, for example, here in this lovely city of Luxembourg, to have a common message, a narrative, I would say, a story behind our independent actions to tell our citizens how we are going to go to fight these, the hardships that inflation plays on us. This common perspective that we definitely took in the spring of 2020, I feel it's really missing today. And the worst thing that we could do to us Europeans right now is to go back to the blame game that we saw a decade ago among economic policy decision makers in Europe. Let's not do that, and let's act together in a coordinated way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Donoghue, do you agree that coordination is the right way forward, and how?
So we just spent all of yesterday afternoon agreeing a Eurogroup statement on this very topic. And we had one of those Eurogroup meetings in which you could feel the kind of political and economic forces that are developing. And one of those meetings in which you spend half your time trying to invite in speakers and hear what they're saying, and the other half of your time trying to redraft a statement to try to get them all to agree to it in 20 minutes' time. And that was being driven by many of the different forces that the panel have just referred to. So what does coordination look like? So firstly, I think our prism is too narrow if we look at coordination just in terms of fiscal and monetary policy. The other pillar of coordination will be what happens with energy policy. And in many ways, the efforts of our energy ministers in the Energy Council matter every bit as much to our battle against inflation as what the ECB Governing Council will do or Eurogroup will do. So that horizon of coordination needs to be wider because of the very unique nature of the inflationary challenge that we are dealing with. Secondly, then, what does coordination look like from a fiscal point of view? And again, we discussed this at length yesterday, and you really know you're in a new moment of political challenge when you come up with new acronyms. So we have the treaties and much debate about whether they're being delivered or not. But it does appear to me there are three issues that will become really, really important for finance ministers before the end of this year. The first one will be, what is the scale of fiscal support that governments are going to commit to for 2023? And in our statement yesterday, we said that broad-based fiscal support for next year, we believe, is no longer warranted, and how we can deliver that. The second one then, as Mario has just touched on, is where we are with wages. And so far, in many economies, there are signs of those dreaded second-round effects not yet developing. But that will become an ever more demanding topic due to the societal impact that was described by Jeroen there a moment ago, which we are all seeing. So how we can continue to manage that. And then thirdly will be the issue of business supports. How we can support our economies that can be viable, that will be viable in the future, when they're suffering changes in their business models due to the rise of inputs, and whether that is a dairy farmer in Ireland or France, whether it's a manufacturer in Central Europe, that challenge of the design of our business supports, I think, will really matter. And then my final point will be narrative, which is again a point that was touched on there by Mario in terms of the need for a story. I can't help but feel that in the discussion that we've had here about inflation, we haven't anchored it in the fact that this is a policy of security that is being used by Russia on all of us at the moment. And we have to begin by acknowledging all of that, by acknowledging the context of the inflation that we are in. Because if we can't maintain our cohesion in dealing with this inflationary challenge, what is at stake is far bigger than economics, far bigger. And how we can relate where we are back to this challenge to our European project, I think will be very, very important. But then the other issue that I see developing is a challenge that finance ministers face at the moment, which is that we are asked again and again, why can't we do what we did during COVID? If we could find so much money to do so much during the era of COVID, why can't we do the same all over again? And this is why then this challenge of a common narrative regarding where we are, to explain coordination and why we are doing it, particularly across what I think will be a testing end to this year and early 2023, is a great challenge. But the clues to it all are in the Eurogroup statement that we issued yesterday, and we need to flesh that out and develop it more in the time ahead.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll open the floor for questions, but not before I take an opportunity to ask one last question to my distinguished panelists about the future and your wish list. If it were left up to you, what would be the one thing that would be important for increasing the resilience of the euro area and in the EU? And you know, I'm asking for priorities here. You probably have more than one thing, but what would be your top one on your wish list? And maybe if I may go the other way, Mr. Donohoe, can I start with you? What would be the first thing, the one thing?
So I laboured for 2 years in relation I laboured for 2 years in relation to a work programme for the completion of banking union. And I put blood, sweat and tears into it, and I nearly got there twice and didn't. But actually, that work is going to come back. It will come back, because it has to. And Mario gave the great reminder. I remember those meetings about the BIC, and I thought, where are we going with the BIC? And the drawer was opened in another context, and the thinking came out again. So that work is going to come back. So actually, that's not my wish, because I know it will come back. If I had one wish about the euro, it would be to make the euro the global currency to moving towards a lower carbon future. Because whatever currency is on the right side of the energy transition that is now going to happen will give that part of the world that uses that currency an extraordinary opportunity for different living standards in the time ahead. So if I could do one thing, it would be that. Only a small thing.
Wonderful. Mr. Dijsselbloem, can I come to you? What's on top of your wish list?
Well, adding to what Pascal just said, I already mentioned the Capital Markets Union, and I think this is such a strategically important project for the Eurozone. If we want to become more competitive, if we want to become more shock resilient, if we want to involve much more private capital where we lack sometimes public funds, then we really need to develop the capital union. One supervisor, one rule book, deeper markets, well integrated for the future economic development of the Eurozone and the EU as a whole is a crucial element. So I'll stop there.
Well, very clear. Thank you very much. Mr. Centeno.
Well, maybe it's because I left the position not long ago, but I will say exactly what Pascal just said. But let me add here a little bit, elaborate a little bit on that, not too long. We tend to say, and we listened that already this afternoon here, that integration leaps in Europe take place in times of crisis. If we look historically, that is absolutely true. But this sort of aphorism, it hides something very important, is that these developments, the progress we make at each moment in time, does not appear from a blank sheet overnight. It takes a long and quite detailed work that is taking place today. And I know that from the effort that the Eurogroup still, of course, continues to put onto this. So I'll say that completing our institutions will be hit. And don't be mistaken, institutions are always imperfect. They are man-made. There's nothing really that man can do that is not imperfect. So we should not blame over and over again. We need to look at them and improve on them. That's the purpose of all this job. And I'm going to pick one, which will be EDIS, the European Deposit Insurance Scheme. And again, let me provide here a little bit of patience to all of us, because when I mention this for international audiences, I always remember that, or recall that the US took 70 years and more than 150 proposals to Congress to complete their deposit insurance scheme, and it was already back in the early 20th century. So I expect Pascal to present the remaining 146 proposals very, very quick, because whenever you reach the 150, they will approve it. Please. I have a recipe already.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Juncker, your final words?
Yes, I think that we have to complete the banking union. We have to put an end to this coexistence of 19, after the 1st of January, 20 national capital markets. This is not the right response a monetary area should deliver. And I think that we need a common deposit guarantee scheme. All of these three elements are known. All the elements composing the debates we had over the last 10, 12 years are on the table. As the President of the Commission, I relaunched the deposit insurance scheme. It was rejected by the ECOFIN Council. We proposed together with Mario Draghi and the President of the European Parliament and the President of the Eurogroup, Jeroen, at that period, the banking union. It was not followed by immediate effects. So these are three things we can achieve and we have to achieve. The crisis we are crossing is not an argument for letting these three items untouched. We have time to do it, but we are running out of time. And I think that we need a fiscal capacity to be structured, defined, organized, designed in the most effective way. The day will come where the ESM will be used once again. I'm reading in German and British and other papers that the ESM should close down. I'm not of that opinion. There we have an instrument, and this instrument should be kept alive. And in this ESM imbroglio, we have to insert the fiscal capacity. It doesn't make any sense to ask member states to bring new money to a new instruments. We have the ESM, and we should use the ESM, because, as Klaus said, since the monetary policy has been unified in the euro area, and since monetary policy is in the hands of the European Central Bank, there is only one element, one instrument member states and governments can use, that's fiscal policy. In fact, we have to put a fiscal capacity in place, because with the third element, where in terms of competitiveness, member states and governments from time to time are acting, that's social policy. If you have a single monetary policy, if you have a not totally organized fiscal policy, the member states will use the third instrument they have at their disposal, and that's a social policy. Anyway, we are risking a social crisis under current circumstances, and if we are not preemptively acting against the downwatering of the social policy, we should act immediately as far as the social policies are concerned. Make not the mistake to underestimate the heaviness of the consequences of a non-social policy in Europe.
Well, thank you very much for your answers. I think we are ready now to open the floor to questions, Who would like to ask a question? The gentleman here, the second. Perhaps we can collect 2 or 3 questions and come back to the panel. The gentleman here in the middle.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Lazarus Panougias, European Investment Fund, European Investment Bank Group. Inflation, monetary and fiscal, need for coordination, potentially or ideally a common narrative, as you mentioned. How do you see the feasibility, or rather the scope for such common narrative, given the constraint of central bank independence? Thank you.
Thank you. There was a gentleman there at the... Is anybody on that side?
Thank you very much. My name is Olivier Marty. I'm a professor at Sciences Po. I would like to ask 2 questions. The first one relates to the ownership that I believe Mr. Donohoe mentioned. If I'm not mistaken, Mr. Donohoe, you said that the ownership of the issues of the Eurozone were very essential in the member states. My question is, do you think this ownership has improved substantially or just a little bit over the last 10 years of the Eurozone crisis, especially in your countries, and your country also, Mr. Centeno, Ireland, Portugal, or Italy, or Spain, I mean the peripheral countries. My second question is about the package that the European Commission put forth on capping the revenues of the electricity producers and implementing a windfall tax for the fossil fuel producers. You mentioned extensively the need to coordinate fiscal and monetary policy, but you didn't seem to mention this important tool, which seems to me as very positive. But I was wondering if you thought this was enough, and if you would be concerned about the allocation of the funds, especially to the modest households and fragile businesses.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Who would like to respond to any of these questions?
I will respond because I have to leave.
Please.
Because as Klaus did when he was coming from Brussels to Luxembourg, I'm driving from Luxembourg to Brussels to meet my editor. Never miss these moments of, I wouldn't say history, but of publication. So I think to start with the last question, which was submitted to our meditation, I think that we need a common response as far as the windfall profits are concerned and as far as the transmission of the taxation of undue profits to the poorer part of our societies is concerned. Let's not repeat the mistakes we have made in the past, even in recent months, that each and every member state is doing like it seems to be the best solution for the country concerned. Now, in this field, we need a common response from Europe. I wanted to show you that I'm able to deliver short responses.
Thank you very much, much appreciated. Anybody else, and also Mr. Dijsselbloem, would you like to also come into the question? We are frozen. Oh, he has left. Okay, please. Then Mrs. Wait.
Okay. After this inside information,
That's right.
let me answer. Very briefly. Also, the division of labor within European institutions between the central banks and governments is very clear, and it's a matter of practice, not as much a matter of law, I would say. I think we need to understand the importance of taking this right and of taking seriously precisely the division of labor. And it is much easier to do if we do things in the way I was kind of portraying. If you go and look at the United States, it's not that different anyway, and you don't see the sort of difficulties there. And again, what I had in mind was the difficult communication among decision makers that Europe witnessed for quite some time. And that's something that we really should not go back. You want to talk?
I'm going to be really brief, conscious of the meeting with your editor, and I certainly wouldn't want to cause a delay for that important meeting. Number one, the tone within the Eurogroup, to my mind, has very much changed in my 5 years I've been a member of it. I have noticed a far greater awareness of externalities, of spillovers, of the need for a more collective approach to the common challenges that we're facing. And I have seen a very distinct change in that tone over that period, which I believe is very encouraging for the future. And then secondly, I agree completely with Mr. Juncker about the windfall tax. I believe it should best be done at a European level, where it can be implemented in a consistent way across the European Union. And if I go back to the need for a narrative and how we maintain social cohesion across what will be a demanding period, it will be difficult to stand over some parts of our economies making extraordinary profits when we've other parts of our economies not viable and facing very difficult issues about their futures. And I really commend the work that's underway in the Commission on this. I think they've done very good work, very fast, and I hope it will lead to a proposal that we can implement soon.
Thank you all very much, and I think that we have come to the end of our time. I don't think I should attempt to summarize what was said here, but I would just like to thank you for your candid answers and for taking the time to come to us today and speak to us, and for all of you for participating. Thank you all for coming. Now I'll pass the floor back to President Hoyer.
Thank you very much, Maria, for steering this debate, and to all the speakers for their great contribution. I know we have overdrawn our time account quite a bit, but I think it was worthwhile, and I would like to pass my thanks to Pascal, to Mario, Jeroen, and Jean-Claude for a fascinating, inspiring series of interventions and responses to questions. It has become very clear what kind of a paramount role the ESM has played for the monetary union, and without its stabilizing effect over time and its financial innovation, much of what we consider today almost normal would hardly be possible. Think alone of next generation EU would not be thinkable. So instead of summarizing, let me rather follow a famous observation from Mark Twain, which I think was supported by the concluding remarks that we just heard. And I quote, "Plan for the future, because that's where you are going to spend the rest of your life." So thank you very much. And on behalf of the Bridge Forum, I would like to invite you for a drink to give a toast to Klaus. Thank you very much and enjoy the afternoon.